They told us paper was just for writing. They didn't tell us it was for building. Welcome back to the archives of the pivot paper. I've got a story for you today about a woman who had to redraw her own map. It was 2015. The air had a bite to it that year, a sharp clinical cold that seemed to cut right through the wool of Camille's coat. She stood in the center of her drawing room, surrounded by the heavy, silent weight of success. There were the oil paintings of ancestors she barely knew, the mahogany bookshelves that reached for the ceiling, and the deed to the 400 acres of family land sitting in a safe upstairs. Camille was asset-rich. In the eyes of the world, she was a woman of substance, a pillar, a matriarch in the making. But Camille had a secret that sat in the pit of her stomach like a cold stone. She had $1 million in brick and mortar, but she couldn't buy a week of silence. The great erasure of 2015 wasn't just about losing what you had, it was about realizing you couldn't use what you owned. A sudden tax assessment had landed on her desk like a guillotine blade. A clerical error from a decade ago, they said. A minor adjustment that required a major payment. $42,000, due in 30 days. Camille looked at her hands. They were the hands of a woman who managed estates, who signed contracts, who kept the family history. But as she reached for the silver tea set on the sideboard, feeling the biting coldness of the tarnished metal, she realized she was a prisoner of her own portfolio. She couldn't eat the mahogany, she couldn't pay the government in oil paintings, and the land was her soul, but the bank wouldn't let her carve off an acre to settle a debt without a 6-month appraisal process she didn't have time for. She was sitting on a throne of stone, watching the floodwaters rise. The crisis of the asset trap is a quiet one. It doesn't scream, it just waits for you to realize that you are vulnerable. She spent that first night in the dark, the grandfather clock ticking away the seconds of her solvency. She realized that her invisible labor, the years spent maintaining the family's physical legacy, had left her without a personal shield. She had been so busy building the house that she had forgotten to build the gate. Every time she looked at the red-stamped notice on the table, she felt the walls closing in. The neighbors saw the grand house and the iron fence. They didn't see the woman inside calculating which heirloom she could sell without her children noticing. They didn't see the panic behind the old money eyes. She felt the weight of the silver tray as she moved it, a tactile reminder of a wealth that was beautiful but utterly useless in a storm. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Ownership without liquidity is just a high-end form of homelessness. She was one signature away from losing the land because she didn't have the paper that moved at the speed of life. She looked out the window at the bare branches of the oaks. They were strong, yes, but if the ice got too heavy and they didn't have the flexibility to bend, they would snap. Camille was about to snap. She realized that the people who would come to help her, the lenders, the predatory buyers, the distant cousins with offers, weren't coming to save her. They were coming for the feast. The shield isn't for the rain, it's for the people who want to sell you an umbrella for the price of your soul. To be continued. In part 2, we witnessed the turning point, the moment Camille stopped measuring her worth in land and started measuring it in the velocity of her shield. The morning of the meeting, the fog hadn't lifted from the valley. Camille sat in the bank's wood-paneled office, a space designed to smell like stability, cedar, expensive cologne, and old, undisturbed money. Across from her sat a man in a charcoal suit whose smile didn't reach his eyes, a man who saw her 400 acres not as a legacy, but as a distressed asset. "We can certainly help you with the tax assessment, Camille," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "But given your lack of liquid reserves, we need to take a first priority lien on the North Timber Lot as collateral for a short-term bridge loan. The interest rate is a bit high, but considering the urgency..." He slid a paper across the desk. In that moment, the old money mask Camille had worn for decades didn't just crack, it shattered. She realized that the institution she had banked with for 30 years wasn't a partner, it was a scavenger. They weren't looking to save her, they were looking for a way to own the one thing that had been in her family for 4 generations. She didn't sign. She stood up, her hand brushing the cold, heavy brass of her handbag's clasp, and she walked out into the gray light of 2015. She retreated to her sanctuary, the study. The grandfather clock ticked, a rhythmic, unforgiving reminder of the 30 days she had left. She opened her mahogany desk and reached for a mechanical pencil. The dry, rhythmic scratch of the lead against her ledger was the only sound in the room. It was time for the forensic audit. She didn't start with what she owned, she started with where the money went. Camille began a cash flow reconstruction. In the digital landscape of 2015, her wealth was fractured across automated reinvestment plans and set-it-and-forget-it maintenance fees. Every time her timber sold or a rental check came in, the system was designed to swallow it whole and turn it back into illiquid growth. She realized that for 15 years she had been a passenger on her own wealth. The great erasure was happening because she had no visibility. She was asset rich but velocity poor. She was reinvesting in the roof while the foundation was being sold out from under her. She stared at the screen of her 2015 laptop, the whir of the fan sounding like a mechanical panic. The shield isn't for the rain, it's for the people who want to sell you an umbrella for the price of your soul. Camille began the technical pivot, the decoupling of capital. She realized that she didn't need a bridge loan, she needed to break the reinvestment loop. She began to manually override every automated dividend reinvestment and capital gain sweep that had been draining her cash into illiquid holdings. She was unblocking the veins. She sat there for 3 nights, the steam from her neglected tea long gone, mapping out the liquidity shield. This wasn't just an emergency fund, it was a strategic reserve. She divided her capital into 3 tiers: the survival shield, 6 months of operating cash, the opportunity shield, 12 months of tactical capital, and the sovereign guard, the long-term assets. By the 4th morning, she hadn't found $42,000 in the couch cushions. She had found it in the inefficiency of her own design. She realized that she had been paying for growth she couldn't afford and maintenance she didn't authorize. She was firing her advisors and hiring her own data. She felt the coldness of the marble paperweight as she pressed her hand against it, grounding herself in the math. She was no longer guessing, she was architecting. The key to the kingdom was the realization that liquidity is the actual velocity of freedom. Without the shield, she was just a tenant in her own history, waiting for someone in a charcoal suit to tell her when she had to leave. But as she looked at her new map, the blueprint of her tiered defense, she knew that documenting the math was only the first step. To make the shield impenetrable, she had to move from the mathematical to the institutional. She had to build a wall that even a taxman couldn't climb. To be continued. In part 3, we enter the legal reckoning, where Camille turns her cash flow into a fortress and reclaims the gate. The marble foyer of the bank felt different today. It was no longer a temple where Camille felt she might be sacrificed to the altar of interest rates. It was a stage for her reclamation. She walked past the charcoal-suited man from the previous week, her eyes fixed forward, her hand gripping the handle of a heavy midnight blue trust binder. The scent of old, expensive leather followed her, a tactile reminder of the weight of the structure she had spent the last 7 days building. She wasn't there to borrow. She was there to command an exorcism of the old automated ruins of her estate. For years, her wealth had been managed by default settings. Her dividends were automatically swept into illiquid mutual funds, and her rental income was siphoned into maintenance reserves that she didn't control. This was the invisible labor of a woman who was technically the owner, but practically a spectator. The exorcism began with a single sharp instruction to the teller. Cancel all automated reinvestment sweeps across these 7 accounts. The clerk paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as if Camille had asked him to stop the rotation of the earth. But Mrs. Camille, the growth projections for 2016 rely on those reinvestments. I am no longer interested in projections that leave me unable to settle a tax bill, she replied, her voice steady and clinical. I am reclaiming the velocity of my own capital. She was dismantling the gilded cage. By stopping the sweeps, she was forcing the cash flow back into the light of her own ledger. She moved to the private office of the branch manager, not the man in the charcoal suit, but the senior officer who handled the institutional trusts. She laid out her blueprint for the sovereign liquidity account. This wasn't just a savings account, it was a legally ring-fenced fortress. She instructed the creation of a tiered structure where her survival shield was held in high-yield liquid instruments and her opportunity shield was positioned in short-term ladders. Every dollar now had a job description and a supervisor. Her. She was moving from wealthy to sovereign. She wasn't just hoarding cash, she was buying her right to say no to predatory bridge loans and no to the desperate liquidation of family land. The weight of the silver pen in her hand felt different as she signed the new corporate resolution for her family holding company. It felt like a weapon. She was formalizing the family ledger. Every asset, every title, and every liquidity tier was now documented in a master volume that removed the unspoken from the equation. There would be no more guessing where the timber money went or how the property taxes would be paid. The key to the kingdom was this institutionalization of her intent. By the time she stepped back out into the late afternoon sun, the fog had finally lifted from the valley. She felt a lightness in her chest that she hadn't felt since the tax notice arrived. She had taken the mental load of her asset trap and transformed it into a documented system of defense. She was no longer the woman praying the roof wouldn't leak. She was the architect who had already paid for the repair in a future she had already secured. But as the grandfather clock in her study struck 5, Camille knew that her own piece was only half the victory. The shield had to outlast her. The transmission of this power was the final, most dangerous phase of the blueprint. To be continued. In Part 4, we witness the final legacy, the moment the matriarch passes the shield to the next generation and ensures that no one in her line will ever have to beg a man in a charcoal suit for their own money. The December sun of 2015 was pale and distant, but inside the study, the fireplace cast a deep amber glow that softened the edges of the mahogany. Camille sat in her high-backed chair, the weight of the sovereign liquidity binder resting on her lap. It was done. The $42,000 had been paid, not through a desperate loan, but through the strategic release of capital she had reclaimed from her own inefficient systems. She felt the warmth of the porcelain teacup against her palms, a quiet contrast to the biting cold of the silver tray she had gripped in panic just weeks before. The victory wasn't just in the payment, it was in the silence that followed. There was no debt to Marcus, no lien from the bank, and no favors owed to cousins with hidden agendas. Camille had realized that the greatest inheritance she could leave wasn't the land itself, it was the ability to keep it. She had moved from being a keeper of history to being a creator of systems. She was no longer just protecting the 400 acres, she was protecting the access to them. She looked at her daughter sitting across from her, watching the way her mother handled the ledger. The girl didn't see the panic of November, she saw the authority of December. "Wealth is a statue, Camille," she told her daughter, her voice rhythmic and grounded in the wisdom of the archives. "But liquidity is the wind that moves the sails. You can own the finest ship in the harbor, but if you don't have the wind, you are just a beautiful prisoner of the tide." The intergenerational mindset requires us to look past the net worth on a piece of paper and look toward the velocity of freedom. By building the Liquidity Shield, Camille had ensured that her daughter would never have to sell a single oak tree to settle a tax bill. She had hardened the family's defenses so that the great erasure would stop at their gate. She had taken the invisible labor of managing a grand estate and turned it into a visible asset of tiered reserves. She was teaching the next generation that the old money secret isn't just about having assets, it's about having the documented authority to move them at will. The architect's call is a reminder that a life without liquidity is a life lived at the mercy of the highest bidder. Camille stood up and walked to the window. The iron gate stood tall in the twilight, a silhouette of quiet power. She had redrawn her own map. She had turned her gilded cage into a fortress of intent. As she closed the binder, the click of the latch was a final, resolute period at the end of a long, difficult sentence. She had survived 2015, and in doing so, she had future-proofed 2050. The archives of Chapter 9 are now secured. It's time to stop being a guest in your own life and start being the architect. Sign your own pivot. Subscribe to the paper. Legacy is not what we leave behind. It is what we put in place. You have heard the story. You have seen the pivot. Now the drafting table is yours. If you are ready to move from equitable interest to legal sovereignty, join us in the vault. Secure the paper. Protect the lineage. I am the asset architect, and this is the pivot paper.